Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Austin Revel. I run 2F Tactical, an FFL located in New Prague, Minnesota. Check us out at 2FByCTactical.com. That's with the number 2. Please like, comment, subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm going to keep this going. We're hoping to increase the frequencies of these videos and continue to grow the channel. The whole purpose of this is to educate you on federal firearms law in the United States. And what you're going to find out is there actually isn't a lot of it, but it is all intertwined and complicated. So when people come into my shop and ask me questions about, say, the pistol brace rule, the frames and receiver rule, what are they referencing? When I say they, the ATF, the Biden administration in this particular instance, or whoever's in charge, what is the statutes that they're actually talking about? Well, they're all tied together, and it makes this conglomerate of gun control act that you got to think of as a house. You got the foundation and these pieces that are built on the layers, moving its way up. So the National Firearms Act is the base law. That's what everything is tied to. And you'll see a common theme. The Brady bill is no different than any other gun control in the United States. It amends the Gun Control Act. Well, the Gun Control Act amended the National Firearms Act. The Firearm Owners Protection Act of '86 amended the Gun Control Act, which means it amended the National Firearms Act of 1934. That is what's happening here. These are amendments, really, to the base National Firearms Act. That's why when you get advocates, including myself, who thinks the National Firearms Act is unconstitutional and should go away, well, that will fix some of these problems because that's what all this stuff is tied to. It's all tied to the National Firearms Act. If you were to get rid of the National Firearms Act, then the entire house would come crumbling down, just because it's really amendments to the same act over and over and over again. Now, with that being said, we're just talking about the act. We're not going to get into political activism as far as what we should and shouldn't do. I'm more than happy to talk about that in another video and sometime once we get through all these individual laws. I just say all this to say that if you're jumping in right now, you need to go back and watch our videos on the National Firearms Act first, then the Gun Control Act, and the Firearm Owners Protection Act. I know originally said I was going to keep them about 10 minutes. Well, it kind of fudged a little bit there, and it's about 12 minutes or less. We broke the NFA up into 2 different videos just because there's a lot there. I would encourage you to go back and watch those. So now, talking about the Brady bill. This is 1994. Now, there are 2 different firearm laws that would pass federally in 1994, signed into law by Bill Clinton. There is the assault weapons ban, which you hear a lot about. We are going to cover that in the next video. Right now, we're just talking about the Brady bill, which you hear a little bit about. But this is the thing that affects everyone. When an FFL like myself has you fill out your 4473, whether that's on an iPad or that's with the actual physical form, we take that, we turn around, we run a background check system, whether by calling it in to the FBI physically or through a digital online portal where we plug in your information and it tells us, yes, you can have the firearm, no, you're a prohibited person, or researching and delays because maybe, we don't know. Right? That is the system that the Brady bill actually builds. Now, it has 2 parts here. There's the provisional part, which we're going to talk about right now, which was temporary, because in order to get the actual NICS system that's run by the internet and all that we know today, they actually had to physically build it. This is not something that existed. The internet is in its infancy. Digital record keeping and transfer of files is all relatively new, so they had to give themselves time to actually build this digital database that all gun shops, or federally licensed gun shops, I should say, run today. When you go in and you purchase your firearm. So the provisional side of things, the stuff that was supposed to expire, that was a temporary solution that applied only to handguns. So before we get into that, what is the Brady bill named after? Well, it's named after James Brady. Who is James Brady? James Brady is the press secretary for Ronald Reagan. He was shot, unfortunately, in an assassination attempt by John Hinckley, along with Ronald Reagan and a Secret Service member. So they use his name, very popular guy, he's part of the Reagan administration, to promote this bill. This bill was introduced by Chuck Schumer, who was in the House of Representatives at the time, representing New York. He wasn't a Senator Schumer yet, he was still Congressman Schumer. And it was passed through both the House and the Senate and signed into law by Bill Clinton in 1994, and it went into effect in 1994 as originally proposed in 93. Now, so what does it do? So the provisional part, this was a temporary solution, like I said before. This was run by us FFLs through our local chief law enforcement officers, or CLEOs. You would come in, you would buy your firearm, we would have to call our local sheriff or local police department and have them run the background check and clear you for purchasing of that firearm. Now, this was actually struck down by the Supreme Court, this provisional portion. This was the Supreme Court in the U.S. versus Prince versus United States struck these provisions down. Antonin Scalia was in the majority opinion with Chief Justice William Rehnquist, and actually alongside Sandra Day O'Connor. And what they said was this provision violated the 10th Amendment. So what is the 10th Amendment? Well, you hear a lot about the Second Amendment, the First Amendment. What is the 10th Amendment? The 10th Amendment reads, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people, you and I. So what does that mean? It means that since this particular act, this forcing of chief law enforcement officers to run background checks for the federal government, basically, for local FFLs, is not actually a power that the federal government has delegated underneath the Constitution for them to force to do. And since the states, and this does vary because this provisional piece of the Brady bill is kind of actually vague. It says that they only have to do this in the states in which they deem that there isn't sufficient gun control in place. So like California, for instance, you didn't have to do this. They deemed that the state laws were sufficient. Well, in a place like Arizona, which was part of the lawsuit, was like, well, we don't want to do this. We don't have any state law that requires you have to do this. The federal government doesn't have the right to tell us how to do this. And the Supreme Court agreed. So it's like, yeah, actually, you guys can't force it. So that actually got tossed out. So then what we're left with is the main provision, which is NICS. That's the thing, again, that we talked about. This is what every FFL does, right? The FFL runs your NICS system. So once that went into effect, it didn't actually fully go into effect until 1998. So really, about halfway through the provisional period of 4 years, it became defunct, right? Now, when it comes to the background check system itself, doing some research on this, actually, there's some really interesting stuff when it comes to it. But there is exceptions to the NICS that we still have today that some people don't know. So before we get into the statistics, let's talk a little bit about that. So for instance, I'm originally from Alabama, born and raised Huntsville, Alabama. If you have a valid permit to carry card in Alabama, Alabama maintains state compliance with the federal government. Therefore, once they issue you your concealed carry or permit to carry or however your state designates it, you don't have to run a NICS check on that individual at the FFL. They just write down your little card number in your 4473. So there is provisions within NICS that exempts you from the NICS check. If you're buying an NFA item, a suppressor, machine gun, something like that, you are exempt from NICS check because the ATF is running that check for you once you pay your $200 tax stamp. So the FFL has you fill out 4473 when you pick your item up, but you're not actually running a NICS check on them. So there is some nuance within it, but I mean, we won't get in the weeds too much of that. It mostly pertains to the FFL system versus you, the private individual. It does make the distinction, though, that, private individuals, people not engaged in the business of going back to the 68 Gun Control Act definition of an FFL, do not have to do this. This is only federally licensed firearm dealers. Now we have states like California, now Minnesota, Massachusetts, New York that mandate universal background checks. Everything has to go through an FFL and a background check. That is not federally mandated. Those are state-only laws. Now, when you look at the NICS check system, right, this bill was originally proposed in 87, was shot down, finally got passed, right? You got Democrat-controlled House, Senate, and presidency in the early 90s. And I went and looked up. I was just like, what statistics can we find on this when we talk about the problems with this bill? Now, the provisional problems have been shot down by the Supreme Court for good reason. It violates the 10th Amendment. And it was joined cross-party lines between liberal and conservative justices. So there's not a lot of arguments there that it did violate the 10th Amendment. But when it comes to the actual NICS background check system, and I will admit these statistics aren't complete, but from 1998 when it went into effect to 2014, there was 202 million background checks run under NICS. Now, we should put a little disclaimer in there, from 98 to 2004, you couldn't buy ARs or quote-unquote assault weapons. We'll get into that in the next video, but just understand that the real NICS checks didn't really start till post-2004 when you saw firearm sales really skyrocket, right? But 202 million firearms were purchased from 98 to 2014. So, we're looking at a period of, 15 years, 16 years here. During that period, 1.2 million approximately people were denied purchase of their firearm by NICS. That sounds great, right? Now, we're talking about 1.2 million over this entire period, not per year. This is total. And I know these statistics are probably even worse when you look at the most recent history, whether it be COVID and all, where the gun sales have increased. That's 0.06% of the 202 million that were run. The real problem with the Brady Act comes this next piece. Of those 1.2 million, only 720 people total, not per year, 720 people total over this 15-year period were actually, 16-year period, were actually prohibited by federal law to take their weapons home. What that means is there's 1,199,280 people that were denied their constitutional right incorrectly. And this is really the problem we have with the Brady Act, is that you have this new system which is guilty and you have to prove yourself innocent. And that's really the biggest failings here. I can't think of a more damning statistic. And I know there isn't a lot of nuance here, but that's really what the Brady Act does. I mean, it really violates your constitutional rights because of this background check system that doesn't really work. I couldn't find more updated statistics, but I'm sure that's even more skewed now. So just put in perspective, that's 0.06% of 0.06% were actually prohibited people. Everyone else was fine. They made a mistake. And again, just getting into this, I can't emphasize this enough. This is where the problem is with this act. I try to always bring you what it does and then the problems with it. Now, I hope you like this video. Now, we're going to dive in the next video to the assault weapons ban of 1994. And I mean, that stuff gets real heavy, and it does sunset in 2004, but I look forward to seeing you. Like I said, please like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate you taking your time with me to go through the Brady Act, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks.